today we're going to talk about the fall of the Roman Republic, the rise of the Roman Empire, and the reforms that came along with it. Before this point, Rome was almost democratic, and it's true that the high tier of society did have most of the power, but it's at this point where a few key people come and take full control of Rome. Okay, I kinda lied. We're not really going to focus on our friends Caesar and Augustus and their rise to power. Instead, we're going to focus on some of Augustus's reforms and how that affects Roman legislation. While it's true that he did institute most of his reforms just so that people thought they still had a say in the government and so he could keep power, he is still one of the great reformers of history, and in the spirit of Occupy Wall Street, where we are petitioning for government reform, I thought I would decide to talk about one of history's most prolific reformers, Augustus. So let's check back for a minute. Caesar takes his army, crosses the Rubicon in famous splendor, and walks into the Roman government building and takes over Roman government. One-man takeover. Great. But what happens when Caesar dies? Then there's the dispute about who gets to get power next, and the dispute is between three different guys. One is Brutus, who was the guy who killed Caesar. Two is Mark Antony, who's one of the top generals and one of Caesar's friends. And this Augustus, who's basically Caesar's adopted apprentice. So in 31 BCE, there's a famous battle at Activum, and Augustus uses his military tactician skills as learned from his adopted father Caesar, and he beats Mark Antony at this battle and takes full control of Rome. So from 31 to 23 BCE, he will act as consul in Rome, which is technically still the democratic title, although we'll see that there's a bit more to it than just the democratic, I was elected by the people, because really he wasn't. Now, at that point, it probably would have been really easy for him to go, I'm Emperor Augustus, bow down to me, but he didn't. He decided it was smarter to keep a facade of a republic so that people wouldn't get too angry too fast. So that's what he did. Now, in order to do so, he had to change some of the things Caesar did, and he also had to make some new progressive laws. So between 31 and 23 BCE, he'll make a lot of progressive reforms that make a big difference in Roman society at the time. In 27 BCE, he decides to give control back to the Senate, who lost all of their power thanks to Caesar. So now, technically, elected officials have power in government. Unfortunately, he was also kind of controlling them in the background through fear and manipulation, all those kinds of things, but he's no longer consul, he's not emperor, he's known by the name Princeps Senatus, the first of the Senate. So at least the people think they've got something. So now he does something that I'm sure a lot of people would like to see be done today. In order to reduce costs, he actually reduces the size of the military, down from 60 legions of soldiers to 28 legions of soldiers. Unfortunately, there are also a couple of other reasons he did it. While it did diminish costs and it lowered taxes and it made a lot of things easier for a lot of Roman citizens, he also did it because he didn't want a revolution. He didn't want to happen like what happened with Caesar, where one man was able to control the army and take over the government. And he also wanted full control of the army, and the Senate gave him full control of all of the troops in Syria and in a lot of other territories that Rome was occupying, so he still had majority control of the army because he reduced it to such a small size. Now that batch of reforms is something called the First Settlement, so that's 27 BCE. 4 years later, in 23 BC, when all of this is starting to calm down and people are starting to say, well, he hasn't done anything in 4 years, he goes into the Second Settlement. At this point, he renounces any title of the consulship. He's no longer consul, he's no longer Princeps Senatus, but he does get a new title. His new title is Potestas Tribunicas, which basically means, well, I'm not technically part of the Senate, I'm not technically part of any of these things, but it gave him lifetime power to veto any decision by the Senate, and he also had the ability to propose laws to the Concilius Plebis, which is the kind of citizens' assembly where legislation was passed, but he now had the power to put legislation there. This was a way for him to retain his political power with the facade of having given it back to the people, which made them a lot happier. At the same time, the Senate gives him the power of Maius Imperium, which makes him supreme commander of the entire military. So really he's gaining power, while everyone else thinks he's being a good, upstanding citizen and giving power back to the people. And so, with Republican institutions up and running, Augustus cleverly behind the scenes runs the entire start of the empire, while everyone else thinks everything is fine and dandy and almost even democratic. Now, there are a few reforms he does after 23 BCE that are notable, especially for what I want to talk about, or what I am talking about. I'm almost done. One of them is he creates a civil service, which basically is a meritocracy. People who are good at what they do get to participate in the government. They're not elected positions, and they don't really get to pass any legislation, but if you're good at what you do, you get rewarded for it, which is a really new concept at the time. At the same time, he gives regular citizens and equestrians, which are kind of the middle class, the control over taxation and tax collection, which creates a progressive taxation that's never been seen in the world before. Now, the rich are getting taxed, and the poor aren't getting ridiculously taxed. So it really helps out keeping the economy running in Rome because he's given certain powers to middle-class people. So he's done a lot of really good things. He's done progressive taxation, he's given the middle class rights, he's given legislation back to the regular people, and to be fair, this was all to keep the facade of a republic and to gain power at a later date, but at the same time you have to realize that a lot of these things were very good for a lot of people, for as long as they decided to last. So he gives rights to the middle class, he makes progressive taxation, he reduces the military budget, and he is a patron of the arts. Sound good to you?